Hey friends, in this video we are going to take a look at modes for guitar. Made easy. Let's go. Okay, so one thing about the modes is it's very confusing, right? If you're anything like me, you probably go down YouTube wormholes looking for clear explanations of things. Maybe the modes is something you've been interested in learning, but there's so many videos out there that, and so many different explanations actually, you might be getting more confused and it might be actually doing more harm than good. So I've explained these modes to literally hundreds of people over my lifetime, and I think I got a pretty good way of describing them that is as simple as possible. And I think the first thing that you have to understand, if we just go to ground zero, is the formula for a major scale. So a major scale is constructed off of these intervals. If you start from any note, from that first note, you go up a whole step, then another whole step, then a half step, then a whole step, another whole step, another whole step, and then a half step. And this is kind of like, I call it Einstein's theory of relativity for music. It's kind of ground zero and everything kind of jumps off for there. So if we do this on the guitar, it would look something like this. I'm going to start from a C note, and I'm going to do it here on the 3rd fret of the A string and just go up the A string using that formula. So here's a C note, we go up a whole step, another whole step, another half step, another whole step, another whole step, another whole step, and then a half step back to the root. And that gives us a major scale. So depending on what note I start on, it will be that key or that major scale. In this case, just doing it in the key of C, you know, it's kind of like all the white notes on a piano. It's no sharps or flats. This is why a lot of people use the key of C to explain things. It's just easier to write, right? So one more time, we've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C again. Okay, so from there what we can do is we can harmonize this scale. First we'll start with thirds. So that means basically taking the first note and the third note of the scale, which in this case is E, and putting them together. So we get something like this. There's a C note here and an E note here. And you can hear that's harmony, right? Now what we do is we move those two notes up the scale in the key of C. So the first two notes are C and E. The second two notes are D and F. Then E and G. Then F and A. And then G and B. And then A and C. And then B and D. And then we're back to where we started. The important thing here is that you're staying in the key. You're not deviating from that key. What you'll notice here is you get both major and minor third intervals. This is a major third. This is a minor third. Another minor third. Another major third. Major third. Minor third. Minor third. And then back to our original starting place. Okay. Next, what we want to do is add the fifth, and this will create a triad or a simple chord. In this case, the fifth of C is G. I'm going to play that with an open string, so we add that to our C and E, and lo and behold, we got a C major chord. Now, if we move those up the scale diatonically, the next three notes would be D, F, and A. That gives us a D minor chord. If we move those three notes up, we have E, G, and B. That's an E minor chord. Then F, A, and C. That's an F major chord. Then G, B, and D. That's a G major chord. And then A, C, and E. That is an A minor chord. And then B, D, and F. That gives us a B diminished triad. And then we're back to where we started with a C major. So we have a chord for each note of the scale, and it's a formula, so it doesn't matter what key you're in. The root tones starting from the 1 or the first note is this formula. Major chord for the 1 chord, minor for the 2, minor for the 3, major for the 4, major for the 5, minor for the 6, and diminished for the 7th chord. Okay. We can also do this with 4-note chords. These are commonly called 7th chords. So if we add the 7th degree of the scale to our chords, we'll get a little bit more information. It's not going to really change the quality too much, but let's see what happens. So the 7th note of C is B. So if we add that to our C major triad, we get a C major 7th chord. So I'm going to restructure that a little bit. I'm going to play it like this. So there's a C major 7th chord. If we do that from the 2nd note of the scale, it would be D minor 7. And then the 3rd note would be E minor 7, then F major 7, then G dominant 7, then A minor 7, then B minor 7 flat 5, and then C major 7. You know, when we first start playing, we usually start with what I call cowboy chords or campfire chords. You know, G, D, C, and then eventually we get our faculty up a little bit. Maybe we learn a few songs, and then maybe we learn some bar chords, and eventually we traverse on to learning scales or kind of a lead style of playing. So in our mind, usually chords come before scales, but actually it's the other way around. Chords come from scales. So when we're talking about modes, modes are just basically a subset of that scale. So in other words, it's just basically playing that scale over one of its chords and calling it something. So the names are what kind of I think is confusing, because they're not usually words that we use on an everyday basis, like Mixolydian and Dorian and Lydian and stuff like that. But we can assign a modal name to each one of these chords. So the first one is the 1 chord would be C major 7. And if we play a C major scale over that, we call it the Ionian mode, which is just a fancy name for, you know, a major scale. Now if we go to the 2 chord, D minor 7, and we play the C major scale over this, we call that the Dorian mode. So really, D Dorian, which is, we're playing the root of the chord as D, is really just C major scale played over its 2 chord, which in this case is D minor. All right, so the 3 chord is E minor, or E minor 7. If we play C major over that, that is the Phrygian mode. That's the 3rd mode. So we just attach that to the 3 chord. If we play the C major scale over its 4 chord, which is F major 7, we call that the Lydian mode. If we play the major scale over its 5 chord, which is G7, we call that the Mixolydian mode. And then if we play the C major scale over its 6th chord, which is A minor or A minor 7, we call that the Aeolian mode, or the natural minor scale. And if we played over the 7 chord, which is B minor 7 flat 5, we call that the Locrian mode, or Locrian as some would say. But see, I'm not changing the scale. I'm just playing the C major scale. I'm just playing it over the chord. So it's really the chord or the harmony that kind of dictates the sound of the mode. Now you might hear people say, oh, the Dorian mode is, D Dorian is C major starting from D. Well, that's true, but you don't have to start from D. You can start from any note of the scale you want. What I think is more important is where you stop. So you want to make the C major scale sound like a D minor sound, because, you know, D Dorian is played over a D minor chord. So when I play the C major scale over this D minor chord, I kind of want to land on some of these notes of that D minor chord, like D or F or A. That's why you want to kind of know your arpeggios, because they show you where the chord tones are. And I can make that C major scale sound like a D Dorian mode. But I think to start off with, that's just a really easy explanation. You can jump right into this right away. You could throw on a YouTube backing track, and if you know your major scales, you essentially already know your modes, right? You just have to, you know, play it over a different chord. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find a backing track on YouTube. I'm just going to type D Dorian into the search engine, and bring one up that I think sounds cool, and I'm just going to play a C major scale over it. Let's try it. All right, I got a little funky D Dorian groove going on here. So I'm gonna play a C major scale. I'm just gonna kind of play up and down the scale so you could hear the quality of it. So you can see I just stopped on D there, and that is the sound of that D Dorian mode. So even though I'm playing a C major scale, I want to kind of make it sound like D Dorian. So what if you say, well, okay, that's cool, but what if I'm not playing in the key of C? What if I'm playing something like G Dorian? Well, remember, each mode goes along with each chord. So what that implies is when you say Dorian is that it's a 2 chord, all right? And G is the 2 or the second note in the key of F. So G Dorian would essentially be F major. Okay, so you can use this, and of course you can use the correlating pentatonic scales that go along with the sound of that chord. So over a major chord you can use a major pentatonic, over a minor chord you can use a minor pentatonic, and then you can also blend in some of these modal type tones. So I think this is a really easy way to get started with the modes, and you can go a little bit deeper with it and start to figure out what makes this particular mode sound this way for whatever reason. But if you already know your major scales, essentially you already know your modes. So I think it's just a good starting place. This is what I did when I first started, and then I started kind of micromanaging it as time went on. So just a brief introduction to modes, and I hope that kind of explains it for you. I know that it can be a very confusing subject, but you know, with a little bit of just experimentation, you can throw on a backing track, you can deduce what key you're in. Basically what you want to do is count backwards to what the 1 would be. Whatever the 1 would be is the key that you're in. So let's do one more. For example, if I was going to play, let's say, oh, how about C Lydian? Well, Lydian is the 4th mode, and that's implying that C is a 4 chord. And what is C the 4th of? All you have to do is count backwards. So you start on C, what comes before C? B. What comes before B? A. What comes before A? G. G major is C Lydian. It's the same thing. So that's a pretty simple explanation. You can get started with that, and of course, like I said, you can micromanage that and figure out what the formulas are and everything else. But I think that is probably the most easiest explanation I could think of to get started with the modes. So if you like this video, please like, share, subscribe, and you might want to also check out my Patreon page, which the link is in the description, where I'll have PDFs and many more lessons, and I will see you next time.